The storm had left Silver Creek, Texas, a battered mess in the summer of 1879, but it was the sight of Owen Daniels checking his damaged fences alone that made Lydia Montgomery's heart clench with both sympathy and admiration. Rain had plastered his white cotton shirt to his broad shoulders as he methodically moved down the line, assessing damage with a stoic determination that had become his hallmark since arriving in their small community 3 years prior. The thunderheads had finally rolled eastward, leaving behind a sky washed clean and brilliantly blue. Lydia followed at a discreet distance, leather satchel of tools slung across her body, waiting until Owen moved far enough ahead before she approached the sections he'd already inspected. With practiced hands, she reinforced posts he'd simply straightened, adding support stakes where the ground remained too soft from the deluge. Owen hadn't noticed her yet. He never did. The 32-year-old rancher kept to himself most days, exchanging pleasantries when necessary, but revealing little about the life he'd left behind in Kansas. Folks in Silver Creek respected his privacy, though that hadn't stopped speculation about the sadness that sometimes shadowed his eyes when he thought no one was looking. At 27, Lydia had learned to make her own way after her father's passing left her with a modest inheritance and the freedom to live as she chose. Unlike other women in town, she wore practical riding skirts and knew how to mend nearly anything broken. The townsfolk had stopped raising eyebrows at her independent ways years ago, instead coming to rely on her steady hands and clever solutions when problems arose. She ducked behind a scrubby mesquite when Owen paused and turned back to survey the length of fence he'd already covered. His brow furrowed as he noticed the improved sections, clearly trying to reconcile the sturdier posts with his own hasty repairs. Lydia held her breath, feeling childish for hiding yet unwilling to face his questions. After a long moment, he shook his head and continued on his way, shoulders set with renewed determination. The game had begun months ago, after she'd noticed him struggling to manage the ranch he'd purchased from Old Man Wilkins. Pride kept him from asking for help, and something Lydia wasn't quite ready to name what kept her from offering it directly. Instead, she'd fallen into the habit of quietly fixing what he missed, whether it was reinforcing fences after he'd moved on or leaving fresh baked bread on his porch when supplies in town ran low. When Owen disappeared around the bend that led toward the creek bed, Lydia rose from her hiding place and approached the section of fence he'd just left. The post he'd reset leaned at a precarious angle, likely to give way with the next strong wind. She removed a mallet and extra stakes from her satchel, working quickly to drive supporting braces into the muddy ground. "I was wondering when you'd show yourself." The voice behind her sent her heart racing. She spun around, nearly losing her balance in the soggy earth, to find Owen standing not 10 feet away, arms crossed over his chest. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes made her face flush with heat. "Mr. Daniels," she managed, straightening her spine. "I was just following me," he finished, the faintest hint of amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. "Been doing it for months now, haven't you?" Lydia swallowed hard, embarrassment warring with defiance. "Your methods are expedient, but not always lasting." To her surprise, a smile broke across his face, transforming his features from merely handsome to devastating. "Been trying to figure out who my mysterious helper was. Town's been taking bets." He stepped closer, boots squelching in the mud. "Most money was on old Peterson's boy. Clearly they underestimate what a woman can do," Lydia replied, finding her voice. "Clearly," Owen agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Question is, why?" Owen stepped closer, close enough that she could see the droplets of water still clinging to his sandy brown hair. "Miss Montgomery," he said softly, "I believe I've been remiss in expressing my gratitude." "It's nothing," she insisted, suddenly flustered by his proximity. "Neighbors helping neighbors, that's all." "Is it?" he asked, and something in his tone made her look up and meet his gaze. What she saw there, curiosity, warmth, and something that mirrored her own carefully hidden feelings, stole her breath. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and possibilities. Then a distant rumble of thunder broke the spell, reminding them both that the weather remained unsettled. "Another storm's coming," Owen observed, glancing at the western horizon where new clouds were building. "We should finish what we can before it hits." He hesitated, then added, Together, this time. If you're willing. It was a small invitation, yet Lydia recognized it for the significant gesture. It was a man like Owen Daniels, admitting he could use help, offering partnership instead of pride. I'm willing, she replied, and was rewarded with another of his transformative smiles. They worked side by side as the afternoon waned, repairing sections of fence in companionable silence punctuated by occasional conversation. She learned he'd lost his wife and infant son to fever before coming to Texas, seeking a fresh start where memories wouldn't haunt every corner. He discovered she'd declined 3 marriage proposals from suitable men in town because none would accept her determination to maintain her independence. When the first fat raindrops began to fall, they'd covered nearly half the damaged Fenceline. Owen glanced at the increasingly threatening sky, then at Lydia's already damp clothing. My cabin's closer than town, he said, hesitation evident in his voice. You could wait out the storm there. I've got coffee and a fireplace. Propriety dictated she decline. An unmarried woman alone with a man in his home would set tongues wagging from Silver Creek to San Antonio. But the thought of riding back to town in a downpour held little appeal, and something about the tentative way Owen had extended the invitation made her reluctant to refuse. Coffee would be welcome, she said, gathering her tools. And perhaps you'll finally tell me how a Kansas man ended up ranching in Texas. Relief crossed his features. It's not much of a story, he warned as they began walking toward their horses. But I'll tell it if you'll share how a banker's daughter learned to drive fence posts better than most men I've known. The rain began falling in earnest as they mounted and rode toward the modest cabin nestled against a stand of oak trees. Lydia knew she was crossing a boundary, one that might forever alter how the town perceived her. I might have something dry you could change into, if you don't mind men's clothing. Lydia hesitated only briefly before removing her sodden jacket. I'm no stranger to practical attire, Mr. Daniels. Owen, he corrected, striking a match to the kindling. After following me around for months, seems we should be on a first-name basis. Heat that had nothing to do with the growing fire warmed her cheeks. Owen then, and I'm Lydia. It made her chest ache with a longing she usually kept firmly in check. When she emerged, Owen had coffee brewing and was slicing bread at a small table. He glanced up, and something flickered in his eyes as he took in her appearance and his clothes. Better? He asked, voice slightly rough. Much, she affirmed, moving to the fire to warm her hands. Thank you. They settled into chairs before the hearth with steaming mugs, the storm raging outside, while they remained cocooned in the cabin's warmth. A habit, he repeated, his tone suggesting he didn't quite believe her. She met his gaze then, deciding honesty was the only fair response to his directness. And perhaps I wasn't ready for you to see me. Really see me. Understanding dawned in his eyes. I've seen you, Lydia Montgomery. More clearly than you might think. The admission hung between them, weighted with implications neither seemed ready to voice aloud. Owen stood abruptly, moving to the window to observe the storm's progress. Rain's letting up. I should see you back to town before it gets truly dark. Disappointment flashed through her, though she knew his suggestion was the proper one. Yes, of course. They rode back to Silver Creek mostly in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken thoughts. When they reached the edge of town, Owen pulled his horse alongside hers. I'm checking the north pasture fences tomorrow, he said, eyes fixed on some point in the distance. Could use a second pair of hands, if you're not otherwise engaged. A town that size couldn't help but observe the bachelor rancher and the independent spinster spending increasingly more time in each other's company. Some whispers were disapproving, but most reactions were knowing smiles and the occasional gentle teasing when they appeared together at Sunday services. One sweltering July afternoon found them riding the southern boundary of Owen's property, checking water access for his cattle during the dry spell that had followed the earlier storms. He'd cleaned up impressively himself, his usually wind-tousled hair tamed, and his Sunday suit pressed to perfection. You are the most beautiful woman in Texas, he declared as he helped her into his wagon. Every man there will wonder how I got so lucky. Lydia laughed, delighted by his unabashed admiration. And every woman will wonder how the most handsome rancher in the county ended up escorting the town spinster. Owen's expression sobered as he took the reins. You're no spinster, Lydia Montgomery. You're the most vibrant, capable woman I've ever known. Any man would be proud to stand beside you. The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. Then I'm fortunate it's you standing beside me tonight, she said softly. The dance was everything a small-town celebration should be: boisterous, warm, and filled with the kind of communal joy that bound neighbors together through hard seasons and good. Owen proved to be a surprisingly adept dancer, guiding Lydia through lively reels and gentle waltzes with equal skill. During a break in the music, they stepped outside for air, joining several other couples on the wide porch that wrapped around the town hall. The night was perfect, stars scattered across the velvet sky, and a gentle breeze offering respite from the heat inside. "Daniels," called a voice, and they turned to see Sheriff Martinez approaching with a friendly wave. "Fine evening, isn't it? Miss Montgomery, you're looking lovely as ever." "Thank you, Sheriff," Lydia acknowledged with a smile. "The committee outdid themselves this year." "That they did," the sheriff agreed, then turned to Owen. "Heard you might be interested in those 2 parcels adjoining your east boundary. Simmons is looking to sell before heading to California." Owen nodded, his arms settling comfortably around Lydia's waist. "Been considering it. Good grazing land. And I've got plans to expand the herd next spring." "Plans for expansion?" The sheriff commented with a knowing glance between them. "Good to hear. Town needs more forward-thinking folks putting down roots." After the sheriff moved on, Lydia turned to Owen with raised eyebrows. "You're buying more land? You never mentioned that." A slightly sheepish expression crossed his face. "Been thinking about it. Nothing decided yet." He paused, then added more quietly, "A man considers his future differently when he starts to hope it might include more than just himself." The implication wasn't lost on Lydia. Her heart raced as she searched his face in the lantern light spilling from the hall windows. "Owen," he shook his head gently. "Not tonight. Tonight's for dancing and celebrating." His smile returned, warm and full of promise. "But soon, Lydia. We should talk soon." As the final dance ended and couples began gathering belongings to head home, Owen leaned close to her ear. "Ride with me tomorrow? There's something I want to show you." "Curious," she nodded agreement. "What time?" "After church," he said, helping her with her shawl. "Wear your riding clothes. It's a bit of a journey." The summer Sunday dawned bright and clear, perfect for whatever expedition Owen had planned. After services, Lydia changed quickly into her split riding skirt and sturdy boots, anticipation building as she waited on her porch for Owen's arrival. He appeared promptly at the agreed time, leading not only his own chestnut gelding, but also her gray mare, both animals saddled and ready. "Hope you don't mind," he said as he dismounted. "Thought it would be easier than taking the wagon where we're going." "Not at all," she replied, pleased by his thoughtfulness. "But you've certainly piqued my curiosity. Are you going to tell me where we're headed?" "You'll see," was all he would say as he helped her mount, his hands lingering just a moment longer than necessary at her waist. They rode north out of town, following the meandering path of Silver Creek as it wound through rolling hills dotted with oak and mesquite. The land grew progressively more dramatic as they continued, with limestone bluffs rising alongside the water and wildflowers carpeting the open spaces between trees. It was country Lydia knew existed but rarely had occasion to visit, falling as it did beyond the regular paths of town business. After nearly an hour's ride, Owen led them up a narrow trail that switchbacked up the side of a particularly impressive bluff. "The land I'm considering buying." He took a deep breath. "Actually, I signed the papers yesterday." "You did?" she asked, surprised by the definitive statement after his noncommittal words the previous night. Owen nodded, turning to face her fully. "I did, because I finally admitted to myself what I've been feeling for months now." He took both her hands in his. "I love you, Lydia Montgomery. Have since before I even knew it was you following behind me, fixing what I missed." The words, once spoken, felt like the most natural truth she'd ever uttered. "I think maybe I have since I watched you ride into town 3 years ago, looking so lost and determined all at once." Relief and joy transformed his features. He pulled her close, one hand cradling the back of her head as he kissed her with none of the restraint he'd shown by the creek. This kiss was a promise, a claiming, a beginning. When they finally parted, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want to rush you," he murmured. "I know how much your independence means to you. We can take this slow, figure it out as we go." Lydia smiled, heart fuller than she'd ever thought possible. Or, she suggested, we could acknowledge that we've been circling each other for years, and that some things, once recognized, don't need lengthy contemplation. Hope flared in his eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying, she replied, gathering her courage, that I don't need more time to know that I want a life with you, Owen Daniels. Whatever that looks like, however we build it, I want it. With you. He kissed her again, and this time when they separated, he was smiling so broadly it seemed his face could barely contain it. Then marry me, Lydia. Be my wife, my partner. Help me build something lasting on this land. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes to all of it. They remained on the bluff for hours, talking of plans and dreams as the sun traced its arc across the sky. Owen spoke of expanding the ranch, of the home they would build together larger than his cabin but still modest, designed for comfort rather than show. Lydia shared her own hopes, continuing to use her skills to help their neighbors, perhaps starting a small side business repairing items townsfolk would otherwise discard. I want you to know, Owen said as they finally prepared to return to town, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon, that I don't expect you to become someone you're not. I fell in love with Lydia Montgomery, practical, independent, and stubborn as the day is long. That's who I want beside me. She laughed at his description, even as his words eased a worry she hadn't fully acknowledged. And I don't want you to be anyone but yourself, occasionally prideful, unfailingly kind, and determined to handle everything alone. She softened the teasing with a gentle touch to his cheek. Though I hope you've learned that some burdens are lighter when shared. The best lesson you taught me, he agreed, turning to press a kiss to her palm. One I won't forget. Silver Creek received news of their engagement with a mixture of surprise and knowing satisfaction. About time, was Sheriff Martinez's comment, echoed by many others who had watched their relationship develop over the summer months. They married in October, when the worst heat of summer had passed and the land was touched with the golden light of autumn. The ceremony was simple, held in the small white church where they'd attended services side by side. Lydia wore a new dress of deep ivory silk, practical enough for future wear, but special enough for the occasion. Owen stood tall in a new black suit, his expression a mixture of awe and pride as she walked toward him down the short aisle. Their vows were traditional, but spoken with personal conviction, each word a promise they intended to honor through whatever challenges life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen's kiss was both reverent and possessive, drawing good-natured cheers from the assembled townsfolk. The celebration afterwards spilled from the church to the town square, where tables groaned with potluck offerings, and the same band that had played at the Founders' Day dance provided music for those inclined to step lively. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit, and the festivities continued, a community's blessing on the union of two of their own. Late in the evening, Owen found Lydia in conversation with Martha Peterson, the storekeeper's wife. He approached with 2 glasses of punch, offering one to his new bride with a warmth in his eyes that made her cheeks flush despite months of growing familiarity. Mrs. Daniels, he said, the name still new and wonderful on his tongue. May I have this dance? Martha excused herself with a knowing smile as Owen led Lydia to the area cleared for dancing. The band was playing a slow waltz, allowing him to hold her closer than propriety might otherwise permit. Happy? He asked softly as they moved together beneath the starlit sky. Completely, she assured him, resting her head briefly against his shoulder. Though I must admit, I'm looking forward to when we can slip away without appearing rude to our guests. A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. You and me both. But they'll understand soon enough. Every married couple here remembers their own wedding night. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. And I've been dreaming of having you all to myself for longer than I care to admit. Heat bloomed within her at his words, anticipation for the intimacy they had carefully deferred until marriage. Then perhaps we should begin making our farewells, she suggested. It's getting late, after all. Owen's smile was answer enough. They made a circuit of the gathering, thanking friends and neighbors for their attendance and good wishes. Within half an hour, they were in Owen's wagon, their wagon now headed toward the ranch that would be their shared home. The cabin had been transformed in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Owen had added a proper bedroom for them, with large windows that would catch the morning light. The main room now boasted furniture Lydia had brought from her house in town, blending seamlessly with Owen's more utilitarian pieces to create a space that reflected them both. But it was the new workshop behind the house that had brought tears to Lydia's eyes when Owen first showed it to her, a light-filled space with sturdy workbenches and storage for all her tools, purpose-built for her to continue the repair work that brought her such satisfaction. "I meant what I said," he had told her as she explored the space in wonder. "I want you to be yourself, all the parts of yourself that make you who you are. This is your home too, and your life should have room to flourish here." Now, as they approached the cabin illuminated by a lantern Owen had left burning on the porch, Lydia felt a surge of emotion at the sight. This was home now. Their home. Owen helped her down from the wagon, but instead of leading her inside, he surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "I believe there's a tradition to uphold," he explained at her startled laugh, carrying her up the steps and across the threshold with ease. Inside, he set her gently on her feet but kept her close, his expression growing serious in the lantern light. "I want you to know something, Lydia. Something important before we start this life together properly." "What is it?" she asked, reaching up to smooth a lock of hair from his forehead. "I never thought I'd love again after Sarah died," he said quietly. "Never wanted to. The pain of losing her and our son nearly destroyed me." His hands framed her face with infinite tenderness. "But loving you doesn't diminish what I felt for her. It's not a replacement or a second choice. It's entirely new, entirely its own. You've helped me understand that the heart isn't limited, it grows to encompass more love when we let it." Tears welled in Lydia's eyes at his words, so heartfelt and vulnerable. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered, "and for trusting me with your heart. I promise to guard it carefully." "I know you will," he murmured, bending to kiss her with a gentleness that quickly deepened into something more urgent. When they parted, breathless, Owen's eyes had darkened with desire. "I love you, Lydia Daniels, and I intend to spend the rest of our lives showing you just how much." "I'm counting on it," she replied, reaching for his hand to lead him toward their bedroom. "Starting tonight." The years that followed fulfilled the promise of that beginning. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, expanding gradually as they acquired adjoining properties. The modest herd grew, providing a stable income that allowed them to weather the inevitable lean years when drought or illness struck. The community came to rely on them, both Owen for his fair dealings and willingness to lend a hand to neighbors in need, Lydia for her practical skills and quiet generosity. Their home became a gathering place, hosting Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations that drew friends from miles around. In their second year of marriage, their first child arrived, a daughter they named Elizabeth, with Owen's blue eyes and Lydia's determined nature. 2 years later came James, a sturdy boy whose gentle heart belied his rambunctious energy. And 3 years after that, to their surprise and joy, twins Sarah and Thomas completed their family, filling the house. Owen had continued to expand with laughter and occasional chaos. Through it all, they maintained the partnership that had begun that day after the storm, when Owen walked the Fenceline and Lydia followed, quietly fixing what he missed. They worked side by side, raising children and cattle, building a life rich with purpose and love. On their 20th anniversary, Owen surprised Lydia by taking her back to the bluff where he had proposed. They rode up the now familiar trail, the journey easier with the improved path they'd maintained over the years. The view was different now. Their ranch sprawled across land that had once belonged to others. The town of Silver Creek had grown, and a railroad spur glinted in the distance, evidence of progress reaching even their remote corner of Texas. "Hard to believe how much has changed," Owen remarked as they stood together at the overlook, his arm around her waist in a gesture that had become second nature over 2 decades of marriage. "And how much hasn't?" Lydia added, leaning into his embrace. At 47, she remained strong and capable, though silver now threaded through her dark hair and laugh lines framed her eyes. Owen, his own hair more gray than sandy brown at 52, nodded in agreement. "Best decision I ever made, asking you to marry me on this spot." "Best decision I ever made, saying yes," she countered, turning in his arms to face him. "Though I maintain I'd been making good decisions about you for months before that, starting with fixing those fences you thought you'd repaired properly." Their eldest, Elizabeth, was considering marriage to the new schoolteacher, while James showed every indication of wanting to expand the ranch further west. The twins, nearly 15 now, were developing their own interests, Sarah with a talent for horses that surpassed even her father's, Thomas with a head for figures that suggested a future in business. "Did you ever imagine this?" Lydia asked as they watched the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. "When you came to Silver Creek, alone and hurting, did you ever picture your life becoming what it is now?" Owen shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "Never. Couldn't see beyond the next day back then, sometimes the next hour." His arm tightened around her. "You gave me a future when I thought mine was finished, Lydia. You and the children, you're the greatest blessing a man could ask for. We built it together," she reminded him, her head resting against his shoulder. "That first fence was just the beginning." As twilight deepened around them, they gathered their horses for the ride home, where their children waited and the lights of the ranch house glowed welcoming in the distance. The path was familiar now, worn smooth by 20 years of journeys together. Lydia glanced at Owen as they rode side by side, his profile strong against the darkening sky. He caught her looking and smiled, that same transformative smile that had first captured her heart all those years ago. "Race you home," he suggested, eyes twinkling with mischief. "You'll lose," she warned, already gathering her reins. "Probably," he agreed cheerfully, "but I'll enjoy watching you win." With twin laughs, they urged their horses forward, racing toward home as they had so many times before together, evenly matched and delighting in each other's company. Behind them, the bluff stood sentinel over the land they'd made their own, witness to a love that had begun with a storm, a damaged fence, and a woman who followed quietly, fixing what a man had missed. And ahead, their future stretched before them, filled with the promise of more days like this, one challenging and imperfect, but faced together, with the strength of a bond forged through shared work, mutual respect, and a love that had only deepened with the passing years.